Enrichment, Enlightenment, Transformation. Rabbi Yisroel Cutler, the spiritual leader of Chabad of Cary, North Carolina, guides anyone who has been searching for a meaningful life and conscious living. Join our discussions about the mundane, our daily activities, and then infuse every day with a spiritual twist from the inspired sages of the Talmud and Jewish mysticism, which many call Kabbalah. We learn from the root source of all religious monotheistic traditions and delve into the symbolism and levels of meaning from biblical stories.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for everyone tuning in online to today's class. Today's class will be about the flood, Noah. We restarted the Torah a few weeks ago, so we're doing it again. And of course, when you do it again every single year, it's got to be different. Page 4. To all those joining in online, we love that you're with us. We love when you can put in the chat box that you're here, your name, and even ask questions, and Amnon will include it as part of the program today. So when we study Torah, we start all over. Look, we know the stories, we know what's going to happen, but we learn it new every single year, and we learn it fresh, and that's a challenge every single year, to look at the same stories and to relate it to your lives. And that's really what Torah is about. If it's just the story, that's not Torah. Torah means teaching. It has to be talking to me today. It talks to me today, that's Torah. So we're in the second Torah portion. Last week we had the creation of the world, and of course everything is nice and jolly, and it starts off on a good note, more or less. We had the first murder last week, so not all fun and games, but generally positive, and then things quickly suing out of control, and it's not 10 generations go by and the world is chaotic and a dangerous place to live, immorality everywhere, murder everywhere, robbery everywhere, and that is the story of Noah. And what we're going to learn today is what the spiritual meaning of the flood is. And let me begin with a question. If you're God, anyone here, God? And look, let's say we can ask a lot of questions. Was it really necessary to destroy the world? But let's say the answer is yes. Aren't there simpler ways of doing it? Why the drama? I mean, a flood's a pretty big operation, you know? Well, aren't there simpler ways of pulling that off? I mean, if you are God.
But if you're still going to work within nature, yes, the rain was a little extra nature intensity, but it was still using the basic elements of the world.
So that's good. God doesn't do a miracle unless it's absolutely necessary. So the fact that rain is a natural phenomenon, here there's more of it, and lots and lots and lots more of it. So that way the destruction is enclosed within some sort of natural law. The flip side is Noah's survival sort of breaks natural law, because having a boat with all the animals doesn't make much sense naturally. But at least as far as the destruction goes, you're right. That would be a way to do it in a natural way. More natural, perhaps, than in 2 weeks from now when we have another evil city that's destroyed, Sodom, and that's more fire from heaven and that kind of stuff. So or Pharaoh. So you're right. As far as the biblical disasters go, this one is far more natural. All right, good.
It also gave people a huge amount of time to repent.
Okay, so that's an important point.
Stopped it.
But it wasn't that natural.
It was not.
And God needs, when he does those things, he wants to show that it's him and not just the rain falling out of the sky to make it look
correct. And then there's always a mix. On one hand, you have to be blind to think that it's just a coincidence. Yeah. On the other hand, guess what? Sometimes people are. And in fact, the very next story after the flood, much later in this week's Torah portion, we're not going to do that, is where they build this huge tower known as the Tower of Babylon. And one of the reasons they built it is, you know what? There must be a glitch in the system, and every 1,200 years there's a big flood. So let's build a big tower in order to avoid that. So, yeah, that is one of the meanings of the Tower of Babel. That's very simple. I mean, isn't that a simple interpretation?
I thought it was just
to rebel against God. That's one, but another one is let's make sure the flood thing doesn't happen again. So, Pam, going back to your question, if that was the reason they built the tower, they missed the point, right?
The boat.
They missed the boat. Okay. Text 1A. Why don't you begin, Barbara? Page 4. Yeah.
Now the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased, and they lifted the ark, and it rose off the earth. And the waters became powerful, and they increased very much upon the earth, and the ark moved upon the waters. And the waters became exceedingly powerful upon the earth, and all the lofty mountains that were under the heavens were covered up. Everything that had the breath of the Spirit of life in its nostrils, of all that were on the dry land, died. And the flood blotted out all beings that were upon the face of the earth, from man to animal, to creeping thing, and to the fowl of the heavens. And they were blotted out from the earth, and only Noah and those with him in the ark survived.
So that is what it was. It was, again, the 40 days of water, of rain itself. But even after the rain finished, the waters were still churning for a long time. And that is what happened in the Torah portion. Why did it happen? So just rewinding a little earlier, Hal, why don't you do the verses beforehand? 1b.
Now the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth became full of robbery.
Anyone know how to say the word robbery in Hebrew?
No.
Because robbery is just one translation. It means lawlessness. It means just violence and criminal activity everywhere. Turn to the Hebrew, whoever can read. Look at the
Ish hek.
no, Vatisha Ches is the
Hamas.
beginning.
Hamas.
Hamas is
Yeah.
the word.
Hamas.
Hamas.
Hamas is the word for lawlessness?
Yeah.
Wow.
Robbery, lawlessness, violence. Violence. Hamas means violence in Hebrew.
Hamas is a Hebrew word.
Well,
Yeah, except it's Hamas, not Hamas. So I don't know if, but that's, when I see that,
It means
But-
the same.
but-
it's
at
pretty
the same
scary.
time-
Yeah.
But anytime you move between languages, you're going to have some phonetic resemblances that.
So that's what it says. Vatimale haaretz Hamas. The land was full of Hamas. It translates it here as robbery. It refers to violence, lawlessness in general. So again, God destroys the world, and obviously, it was a pretty bad point where there had to be, when you get the computer and you install a bunch of programs, and then it's like, you know what? This is a virus. I should have done Windows 10, not Windows 7. What do? You do the factory reset. It sounds like that's what's happening over here. They're restoring the world to its factory condition, in a sense. So it was the first Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, that asks the question I started off with at the beginning of the class. And that is text 2. Do you mind reading? Sorry, what was your first name again?
Janice.
Janice, text 2. This is a mystical text, Torah or.
Okay, the idea of the great flood is difficult to understand. If the goal was to wipe out the sinners, why was it necessary to cause such a great tumult? It is certainly within God's capacity to instantly remove them from the world without a flood.
So that is the question Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi asks. Why the drama? So Hal mentioned it stretched out for a long time, and that gave people the ability to do teshuvah, to repent.
But
They didn't. And they didn't, but they could have. And you can imagine Noah's hammering away. There's no, electric tools in those days. Hey, Noah, what's going on? Oh, did you hear the news? A big flood's coming. They would be able to have that communication, and hopefully he would inspire some people to repent, which he did not. And by the way, we're not talking about this particular idea today, but that is one of the reasons why Noah is not considered the first Jew. He's not.
He didn't warn the people.
There was, people asked him what he was doing, and he explained to them. Yeah.
Yeah,
But he didn't. Come on, not one person.
But not. No,
You don't have to be the best preacher in town, but not one person you could have influenced except for your family. Yeah.
Did he want to influence the people? Did he tell them that it was because their ways were wrong? Or did he just say, "Oh, I'm building an ark because a flood is coming," and everybody said you're crazy?
It could have been that
actually
he.
tell
It
them?
could have been that he did actually tell. But when do words have the desired impact? This is true of anyone, whether you're a parent, you're a rabbi. When do your words have impact? Yeah.
I would think around day 20 of serious rain, people would say, that Noah might not be so
Yeah,
crazy, and I need to book a seat.
Right.
But then
The question, it might have been too late by that point, though.
Yeah. the thing is that he wasn't like Moses, that
Correct.
Moses got mad at the people. Moses was really insisting. I don't know that he was really, telling the people what was about to happen.
Right.
Rather
Right.
than I'm building an ark and there's going to be a flood.
Correct. And this became a Hasidic term called a tzaddik in pelts. What that literally means, and that's my phone, if we could. How do you mind just undoing, I forgot to turn it off. Tzaddik in pelts is Yiddish. It means a tzaddik in a fur coat. It's an expression. Pelts is a fur coat. Tzaddik is a righteous person. What does that mean? If it's cold outside, there's two ways if it's cold outside, there's two ways to try to stay warm. One is by wrapping yourself in a fur coat, and one's by lighting a fire. In other words, are you just trying to live for yourself, or are you trying to have an effect on the environment and the atmosphere around you? The tzaddik in pelts is the person that says, the heck with the world, I'm doing my thing. That would be the Noach approach, where the Torah says that Noach was a tzaddik. He was a righteous person. And we can't word it any other way. He was a good guy. But what he did not do is take responsibility for something greater than himself. And that is one reason why he's not seen to be as the first Jew. Because he follows the rules obediently, but he doesn't have that sense of responsibility. It bothers me even today. There's some, again, in every religion, there's that idea that I'm going to do, live in a bubble, and I'll live a righteous life, but what goes on outside of me is of no, it's not my business. To say it's not my business, that is not a Jewish idea. That's not a Jewish idea. Now, I want to give him credit. There's a lot of lessons we learned from him, as we'll continue today. But contrasting him with an Abraham and Sarah, it's.
So you're in the camp that he was Sadiq in his day.
Oh, and in his day,
Right,
he
right.
was a tzaddik.
But isn't Jacob considered actually the first Jew, not Abraham?
Abraham and Sarah. Abraham and Sarah, absolutely.
Stepped
But
away
there
from
are
that.
Absolutely.
teachers that it's
Well,
Jacob
Abraham
because
argued with
his
God.
name.
So his name is Yisrael. So that's where the term Yisrael came from. But Avraham is called Avram HaIvri. He was on the Hebrew. He's seen as the first Jew. Him and Sarah are seen as the first Jews.
Rabbi,
I've
Yes.
read another teaching also.
Judy in the chat is asking, was the land of Israel also filled with Hamas? Was it protected from the flood?
The literal meaning, very good question, Judy. Literally, if you read the Torah, the storyline, there's no exceptions. The flood is everywhere. And at least naturally, if there's water everywhere, it would make sense that, and it's even hitting the mountaintops, it would make sense that Israel was included in there as well. There is a midrash that writes about a little oasis, so much so that the dove that pulled the olive branch from somewhere might have pulled it from there. Later in the story. So there is a midrash, there is a teaching that parts of Israel were spared from the flood. That would not be the literal reading of the story. Good question. But yeah, the verse says the entire earth was filled of Hamas, Israel included. That's the entire earth.
And Debbie says hi.
And it's good to hear from you, Debbie. Very good. Okay, so although it's a good Hollywood script, it seems, again, the Alter Rebbe asks a little dramatic. Why need all of this? So one answer is to give them a chance to repent. One answer, as you suggested, Brian, is because it allows the miracle to be in more natural means. It still seems, like a pretty big production for something that didn't have to be so big. Yeah.
It would also signal a rebirth
Mm.
afterwards.
And that's really where we're going to be going with that. That's really why specifically this method, because it has to do a lot with rebirth. Going back to the Alter Rebbe's question, where he says, why was it necessary to have this? Couldn't God have an easier way of doing it? There's an old way they used to be able to tell whether someone studied Chassidut, Jewish mysticism, or not. What was the test? How could you tell if someone studied Jewish mysticism or not? You ask them a theoretical question. If God wanted to destroy the world, how would God do it? Right? That's the question. So someone that never studied Jewish mysticism would say, a big fire, a big flood, hailstones. What would the chassid say? What would God do if God wanted the world to cease to exist? God would do nothing. Because remember, a big fundamental idea of Jewish mysticism is the world always needs God's input to keep it in existence.
Or God's creating the world.
Always. So how would the world cease to exist? Don't do anything. That was always the. So I guess maybe when the Alter Rebbe asked this question over here, if the whole point was to wipe out the sinners, look, as long as God's not thinking about us, as long as God is not speaking us into being, we would cease to exist. So there could have been a quick way of doing it. Now, I understand that's never happened before, so that would have been breaking rules of nature. Yeah.
Also, in early Genesis, the earth and plants sinned.
Okay, that's a midrash. That's not a storyline because they don't have freedom of choice. So I know what you're referring to, though. I do know what you're referring to. Yeah. Yep. About not listening to the command of God when it comes to their creation. Yeah. But they don't have freedom of choice.
Back, they don't have freedom of choice now, but did they have freedom of choice when
No,
they were?
but so then we need an explanation on that story, but we'll do it another time. Okay. The other point in this is that, as you mentioned, Brian, when the Torah talks about Noach being righteous, it says he was righteous, but adds this little caveat, text 3a, Ham, 3a, 3b, 3a, yeah.
These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man. He was perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God.
Pretty good accolades. These are, this is a pretty, Torah doesn't always praise people like this. This is a big deal. He was a tzaddik. He was perfect in his generation. He walked with God. The Torah should say that about all of us. That would be pretty good. But the rabbis, the sages, pick up on perfect in his generation. 3b. Yeah, Pam, do the continue.
In his generations, some of our sages interpreted favorably. How much more so if he had lived in a generation of righteous people? He would have been even more righteous.
Meaning, if he managed to live so righteously, even with a bunch of crooks around, just imagine how good he would have been had he had Abraham around, a Sarah around, a real role models around. Then he really could have been good. The others
interpreted derogatory. In comparison with his generation, he was righteous. But if he had been in Abraham's generation, he would not have been considered of any importance.
So that's the way others view it. But because I want to save time here, I'm just going to paraphrase the next couple texts. And the texts are generally, the Torah doesn't speak derogatory about people. Why would the Torah have told us, oh, he's pretty good relative to everyone else? Why do we have to know that? Why is that important to us to know that?
Because of our responsibility towards others.
Oh, interesting. So we should learn what Noach did wrong in order that we should know what to do from what he did not do. Very good. I like that. The Torah doesn't for no reason tell us the negativity of others. But if it comes to teach us a lesson, then there might be a reason to word it that way. And what you said, Pam, makes a lot of sense, that the Torah wants to do that. But generally speaking, the Torah does not word things in a negative way. In fact, when it talks about Noach bringing in the animals, and there's the famous idea that it says, when all the kosher animals Noach took 7 of, and the non-kosher animals Noach took 2 of, this is a fascinating, the laws of kosher are not given until so much later in the Torah.
And he's still a man.
Right,
How did he know?
right. So this is the idea that Torah are spiritual truths that even before they were formally given, they had an intuition. But what's interesting is it says of all the beasts that are tahor, pure, and all the animals that are not pure. It doesn't say impure, it says not pure. The Torah normally phrases things in a refined, nice way. Why then would it say about Noach that he was not good, that he was only good relative to his people? Okay.
And Debbie has a question and a comment.
Sure.
Debbie says, how would we know if he stopped thinking of us? It's possible he takes a break and then thinks again, kind of like when we sleep. And then she adds, he was special and we can also be special. No matter what is going on around us, we can be righteous.
Good. So that would be the first way of looking at it. No matter what's going on around us, we cannot excuse ourselves based on the behavior of other people. That would be true according to one opinion of the sages, right? That it's saying it in a compliment. But what about the opinion that says he was only good relative to his generation, but had he lived in another generation, he wouldn't have been very good? What is the meaning of that one? So that's what we have to still get back to. As to your other question, Debbie, about God thinking about us, Jewish mysticism, Hasidus, says that the world is naturally nothing. In Bereshis, God creates the world from nothing. And when you turn something from nothing into something, it's contrary to its natural existence. The same way, if you drop a penny, it will naturally fall. Gravity will pull it down. And if you throw it up in the air, it's only going to be carrying in the air as much as the energy that you put into it, right? But it won't continue to stay in the air. Similarly, Chassidus says that when God creates the world, it will revert back to nothingness unless it's always being put into motion. Unless it's always being put into motion. Why? Because it starts with nothing. When I take a piece of wood and I turn it into this table, all I did is I changed the what? The form of the wood. The wood was always there, now I only changed the form. But if you begin with utter nothingness and you turn it into somethingness, it always needs God's attention because it doesn't really exist. It would be as if, Debbie, I asked you to imagine in your mind a sports stadium with 50,000 people and they're cheering and they're making a lot of noise and the home team is up to the plate. There's 3 balls and 2 strikes. And you start imagining this scene in your mind. And then I were to ask you, what would it take for those 50,000 people to stop existing? Well, they only exist in your mind, right? So what would it take for them to stop existing? For you to space in. The moment you space in, they would stop existing. Similarly, Chassidus says that Hashem is conscious of us, and that is what's keeping us into existence, and that has to be all the time. Okay. Why the flood? So now let's go to section 2, text 5. Why a flood? Why not another method of punishing the world? Why the drama? So the Alter Rebbe answers with a profound idea. Text 5. Jersey, please.
According to scriptural law, immersion is effective in any collected body of water as implied by the verse, a gathering of water. That is, any gathering provided it contains enough water for the entire body of a human being to immerse in it at one time. Our sages determined that this to be sufficient water to fill a cubit by a height of 3 cubits. This measure contains 40 sa'eh of water.
And that was a confusing text. What is this a reference to? The laws of building a mikvah, a spiritual pool. In Jewish law, the mikvah comes into use many times. How much water has to be in a mikvah? Jewish law says 40 sa'ah of water. Sa'ah is a biblical measurement. And it's enough water to fill, again, a cubit is about 1.5 feet.
1 by 3.
Yeah, so
3 cubits.
enough for one person to crouch. That's the minimum size of a mikvah, okay? Even today, by the way, when they make a mikvah, this number is important. Because when they make a mikvah today, it's much bigger than that. But the mikvahs that they construct today are actually 2 pools of water, one on top of another. Are you familiar with this, Brian, or not? Okay. The mikvahs that they make today are not natural gatherings of water. They are construction, right? Mm-hmm. But the rules of mikvah still apply, that the original pool has to be rainwater. Rainwater that was never gathered or collected through pipes or anything else. And the way it is whenever you go to a mikvah today, underneath, there's 2 ways of doing it, either side by side or underneath and top. Let's pretend it's side by side. There's actually 2 pools of water. The first is rainwater, and it's going to be at least 40 sa'ah of water. That is attached to another pool that people actually immerse in, which is tap water, which has a filter on it, which is always drained, and is always clean. But the original 40 sa'ah of water comes through what? Through rain. Through rain. It can only be through rainwater.
Is
And they
it
have to
mixed
wait,
in?
and they have to wait when they make a mikvah from scratch. They have to wait till 40 sa'ah of water come, and it could take months for that to happen, because it cannot. I don't want to get technical, but once it's piped in, it no longer is kosher for mikvah. So it has to naturally
So
flow.
the people aren't dipping in rainwater.
They are dipping in a pool that is connected to one by a simple. Think of like a window, an open window, and the two pools are connected.
They're not connected, they're like in front of each other. They're not,
There's
The
two
water-
ways. The one in Raleigh is side by side. Yeah, or side by side. Side by side.
so the rainwater doesn't flow to the tap water.
No.
And gets
But every
mixed
now
in.
and then you have to ensure that the rainwater doesn't go down, because if the
Oh.
rainwater ever goes below 40 sa'ah, the whole mikvah is not kosher.
Ah.
Okay. Now, the easiest type of mikvah, of course, is a natural body of water, an ocean or a lake or so on and so forth.
An ocean is considered?
An ocean is kosher. The problem is, there's ocean would be considered kosher, yeah. Rivers, not always. The laws are very complicated. Some lakes, artificial lakes, may not be. It's complicated. In any event, interesting. What's the measurement associated with a mikvah? 40. How long was the flood for? 40 days and 40 nights. What is the flood for conceptually? Purifying the world. The world needed a refresh. The world needed to be pure. The world was so saturated. I mean, we think of every sin that happens in the world affects the ground, affects the earth, affects the energy in the world. That needed to be cleansed. In Jewish law and Torah, that is always through water. Water has this ability of transformation. There are many examples of that in Jewish law. When someone converts, there's the idea of going to a mikvah. Why? Because there's this sense of rebirth afterwards. The laws of mikvah that pertain to a woman who uses it every single time. She has her cycle every single month. It's a rebirth. Many men in Jewish tradition use the mikvah before a Yom Kippur or a Shabbat because of the special energy of a Shabbat or Yom Kippur. That has to, again, to do with a rebirth. So that is what, well, text 6, Brian.
In truth, the purpose of the flood was to cleanse the world, for it had become greatly corrupted and required purification. This, then, is why a flood of all things was necessary, for the water is analogous to the mikvah of 40 sa'ah, which purifies the impure, as did the flood, which purified the earth.
Okay.
I find myself thinking, though, that the 40 sa'ah was established perhaps based on the flood and not the other way around.
Well, yeah, it could, right. It could be the same. I mean, the number 40 also in Judaism. This is not the only example of 40.
No, it's not. I can't remember the other one.
And 40 is also
40 is
always transformation. How fascinating is it? The Jews spent 40 years in the wilderness to go from a slave people to a free people. It's a long march to freedom. It can't happen overnight. Okay? There are other examples. Someone help me out. Anyone online? What other 40s are in the Torah?
Nobody online is talking about this, but Judy is asking, so can a swimming pool be a mikveh?
So most of the swimming pool is tap water, and there's not going to be 40 of rainwater. So a swimming pool would not be a kosher mikvah. Would not be.
Rabbi, the plants had to be destroyed alongside with the people as well because they, in a way, were affected since all the land was
It's
affected.
interesting. You could ask a very good question. What do the animals do wrong? Right? This is a good question. What do the animals do
Or
wrong?
the plants.
Or the plants? And the spiritual meaning of that is, even though animals don't have freedom of choice, we unfortunately are movers and shakers in the world, humans. And when we corrupt the world, it brings down with it other things as well. There is a midrash that writes that the animals were also corrupt during that time. But animals don't have freedom of choice in Judaism. So the way we understand that is, when we mess up, we contaminate the entire world with it. We are movers and shakers. And when we do mitzvot and we make the world a holier place, then everything in the world is operating in a better way.
That's elevated.
Correct. So that would be this idea of the world having to go through this entire mikvah, water, 40, all have to do with transformation. There's a few other examples.
Joseph, something around Joseph 40.
He was 22 years in prison.
The number of
Deb-
rams and things he gave, I don't know what those numbers are.
40. I'm trying to think of
Debbie-
other 40s in the
I don't know,
Torah.
I don't know if there's 40s in his gifts.
Does someone
Debbie is
remember
saying
another 40?
Moses on Mount Sinai, 40 days.
40 days
Oh,
and
40
40.
days.
Oh, there we
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
Thank you, Moshe.
But
Again,
transformational.
sure, that, I mean, that's his transformational experience, and he's
Yeah.
receiving the Torah, godly wisdom, and he spends 40 days and 40 nights.
But 3 separate periods of 40 days.
Correct. Correct. And forgiveness of the Jews happens during that period. So 40 is very much associated with it. I'm gonna just paraphrase over here. 7, 8, 9. Let's.
Debbie is also adding that Talmud, it takes 40 days for an embryo to be formed in its mother's womb.
Debbie, you read the next text without having the book. I was gonna skip the text, text 7, but since Debbie is a prophetess and she knows what the text is, Debbie, we're gonna read it out loud. You know the text that I decided to skip. Text 7. Why don't you read, Barbara?
40 days corresponding to the time required for the formation of the fetus. For they sinned by burdening the one who formed them, by fashioning the forms of illegitimate
So there's a bunch of adultery happening all over the place and children being born out of unholy unions. And it says in the Talmud that at 40 days from conception, that is considered a significant milestone for a fetus. Medically, I don't know what happens at 40 days from the conception. And I don't know. When's there a heartbeat? At what point?
Before that.
Really? I thought it was after that.
When is a heartbeat? Anyone? Listening audience?
It's like around 2 weeks. It's very
Yeah, it's
early.
very
It's
early.
not 40.
I don't mean exactly. I'm just wondering if there's any correlation at all between
It's about
this.
60, something like that.
60, but keep in mind, when they say 60 days, it doesn't mean from conception. When they say you're 60 days pregnant, it doesn't mean from conception. It means from a woman's last period. You familiar?
Yeah.
So believe it or not, if it's 60 days, that is actually the equivalent. That's pretty close to the 40.
But 40
Yeah.
days,
They-
about 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's
So,
interesting. Again, I don't.
You want more 40s?
Yeah, long.
After class, we only have 12 minutes.
Okay, go ahead.
Who said? Who suggested?
Debbie's got some more.
All right, Debbie. What?
She says in the Kabbalah, 40 represents the 4 sides of the world, each side containing the 10 sfirot, the esoteric powers. And then she said there's also 40 days between the first day of Elul when we begin to blow the shofar to prepare for Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur. So there's a lot of-
Debbie was not bad. Very, very good. Debbie, it's beautiful to be learning Torah, across the world over here. This is really neat. Okay, let's go further. So we see that the text, let's do text 9, the principal element, Hal.
The principal element of what makes the mitzvah effective is the idea that the person absolves his previous identity and is ready to be absorbed into a higher reality. For this reason, anytime a person ascends from the mundane to the holy, and likewise from one level of holiness to the next, for example, from the sanctity of the festivals to the sanctity of Shabbat, he is to
Immerse in a mikvah.
mitzvah prior to, as recorded in the writings of the
So the Arizal, the Kabbalist, says a mikvah has to do with rising or rebirth. The next text is about one who converts. And this is what had to happen in the time of the flood, where you had a world that was so saturated in impurity and violence, it needed a major mikvah, a 40-day mikvah. Okay, that's the end of part 2. Part 3. The Alter Rebbe, who gives this theory about the flood being a mikvah, then continues and says, what is the flood in our life? Okay, what is the flood in our life? Thank God it's not a physical one. We shouldn't have to deal with that. But spiritually, a soul is sent down to this world. We live a certain number of years. We're supposed to do a mission. We're supposed to be cruising along life, doing mitzvot and helping people and doing what's right, serving God. What is the flood waters that rock the boat, that get in the way? So what is that? So it's interesting. This was a few hundred years ago, and it was before Wall Street. And it was before a lot of the stresses we have today in the world. But the Alter Rebbe, a few hundred years ago, writes, what is floodwaters? Where are we up to? I think, Janice, I believe text 11.
Rabbi, before that, can I say something?
Sure.
40 weeks pregnancy, a full-term pregnancy.
Oh,
Oh, wow. 40 weeks?
That's interesting.
40 weeks is a full-term pregnancy. Very neat. Beautiful.
The raging waters are a reference to financial stress and other worldly concerns. Financial pressures trouble our very heart and mind and are thus called raging waters, akin to one who is drowning at sea, as it states, for water has come up to my soul.
In the Kabbalah, it says Mayim Rabim. Mighty waters is a reference to the financial and material stresses we have in the world. When we're frustrated by a bad boss, or the stock market, or earning a living, or a mortgage, or these sorts of things, it says this is flood water that Hashem, that God puts into our life. Why? To make things a little stressful. What is the purpose? So what is the purpose of that, A? And B is, what are we supposed to do about it? And the answer is actually what's so beautiful about this Lunch and Learn. Specifically, we have many classes throughout the week, but there's something very beautiful about a class being in the middle of the day, especially if you're working the rest of the day. The word for ark in Hebrew is teva. Teva. Teva means an ark. Throughout the whole story, God tells Noah, enter the ark. Bo el ha-teva. Go into the ark. The word teva means something else in Hebrew as well. And I'm sure Amnon knows. Maza teva?
קופסה כזאת?
Okay, kufsa, box, would be what the ark means.
תיבת דואר.
It means a word. I know milah is a word in modern Hebrew,
Right.
but a teva, Rashi Tevot, means a word in biblical Hebrew.
Oh, no.
So
I didn't know.
text 12, the Baal Shem Tov writes this idea. Pam.
The Baal Shem Tov expounded on the words, enter into the ark, Teva. A soul descends into this world and the person becomes involved in making a livelihood to feed his household. In such a situation, it is possible that the financial stress can overtake the person and, God forbid, drown him.
So even a few hundred years ago, there was the rat race in life. You can imagine in those days it was probably even worse. I mean, what they needed was basic necessities.
Yeah.
It wasn't luxuries in those days. Yeah.
The solution is enter into the ark, Teva, to connect with the word.
Words. The word teva not only means ark, but it means words. Enter a box. Enter a oasis. Enter an island of
Torah and prayer.
Yeah.
The Baal Shem Tov further explains that the merit of the holy words of Torah and prayer will ensure that you and your wife and your sons wife with you are provided by God with all their needs.
So specifically when everything around you is going crazy, you would say that's the last time I have time for a Torah class. That's the last time I have time for prayer. Prayer, I'll designate for days where things are peaceful and things are calm. Or, today I have a lot of business meetings. It's a hectic day. That's the last day I would have time for a Torah class. The Baal Shem Tov says no. It's specifically when things are raging around you, that's where you need an anchor. And what is that anchor? It doesn't have to be big in time, but it has to be big in heart, big in conceptually, and that is the words, teva of Torah and prayer. And that allows us to, again, just like Noah, who survived and is rafting through the flood, that allows us to be afloat. That allows us to remain above, and it allows us to keep perspective on everything going on around us and not drowned in it. And we have a few more minutes. He continues over here, and he writes, not only does this keep one afloat, he would say, what is the purpose of that box? It keeps you afloat. It makes you not drowned. He goes and argues and says, no, it's more than that. There is a beauty specifically to the Torah study or the prayer that comes in a financially challenging moment or in a stressful moment. There's a certain beauty specifically to that class versus the one that you do when things are tranquil and things are calm. Text 13a. This is again from Torah or this Hasidic text.
Today, everyone has financial stress and otherworldly concerns, akin to the raging waters mentioned before. But these raging waters lift the soul up to higher levels than before. As per the rule, more light comes from darkness. Through experiencing the opposite extreme of darkness and brute materialism, the soul is able to reach boundless levels for love for God.
Meaning, before a soul enters this world, it's in there's no raging waters there. It's in a peaceful place, a tranquil place. It can serve God easily. But it says the soul cannot reach the same depth of its connection to God as when in this physical world. And specifically, what part of this physical world, when it's wrestling with the yuckiness of materialism, it's specifically there when it makes an island for Torah study or prayer, the soul gets this light that it can't even get in the heavenly spheres, because it's the contrast of light and darkness. There's something beautiful about that contrast. Through experiencing the opposite extreme and being in darkness and being in materialism and there lighting a candle, there's something very beautiful about it. And again, in the old days, there was very much a schism, even amongst the Jews, in the times of the Baal Shem Tov, between the scholars who were able to study all day long, and the very simple Jews who were cobblers and were shopkeepers, and they could barely earn a living, and they barely had any time for prayer. In the old days, he worked, morning to dark. And he writes, the Baal Shem Tov writes, 13b,
A common mistake that business people make is that they are not able to pray as do those who study full time. The opposite is true. Business people possess even greater ability to pray, for immense light emerges specifically from darkness.
They're the ones that wrestle more with the world. And the more you wrestle with the world, the more beautiful, special, and bright such a prayer is. So just to finish what we mentioned today, the function of the soul, the flood was to purify the world and elevate the world. And in our own life, when we are in our personal flood with stress and anxiety and worry, we have to enter the ark. And what is that ark for us? Those are the words of Torah and the words of prayer. And not only does that keep us afloat, but there's a depth and a brightness of such prayers even stronger than someone that has a calmer life. And it applies, and he finishes off over here. That is another reason why the Torah refers to Noah in not only glowing terms, but also says he was a regular person. Because it's almost easier to learn from a regular folk, from simple, he was a regular person. Relative to the other people in his days, he was pretty good. But we shouldn't think, that's a Noah. That's Noah. No, we have to strive to do that in our own lives. And we'll hold it over here. Anything else from anyone online?
Debbie has some comments about Daniel says about Nebuchadnezzar, about the Teva. I don't know. Do you want me to?
About the Teva?
Yeah. Do you want me to read?
Let's finish. Everyone, 30 seconds. Yes.
She says, Strong's Concordance Teva, to be startled or alarmed. Original word is Teva, part of speech, verb. Transliteration, Teva, it's...
All right, well, we'll hold it over there. Thank you, everyone, for joining us online. Anyone that joined us online, you want to support the program, you can hit the donate button on Nissan Communications. Thank you, Amnon, for making this stream possible. We will be back, God willing, next week, same time, same place.
Tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Health In with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members, The Tanya Love Show, Your Healthy Pet with Gisela DiCarlo. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by Atomus.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters for professionals, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.